Hello everyone. Man, I had some doubts I get to make this video the way I wanted, but here we are at my Lies of P review. Developed by NeoWiz Games and Round 8 Studio and also published by NeoWiz Games, this is a developer that wasn't really onto the scene until BAM! This game comes out. Falling squarely into Souls-like genre, this thing beat me up enough that I was second guessing if I get it down, but this game had some interesting twists I'll talk about later. I want to start this off with a fair warning. This game will go hard on you. Do you like being angry and raging out? Do you like having your head beaten? Lies of P would do that while smiling at you with his middle finger out. I flipped out enough times streaming my playthrough, but I found myself wanting to come back for more, despite it being unforgiving in numerous places. Let's start off with the story theme, since that kinda leads into the visuals. I'll attempt to refrain from too many spoilers, but they openly call this a love letter to the story of Pinocchio. If Pinocchio was set in a steampunkish apocalyptic world of death and horror, you play the role of robot Pinocchio, the destroyer, who is set on a path to save the city from his rampaging robot fellows who fell into a human-killing frenzy like so. Step by step, heart to heart, left, right, left, we all fall down like toy soldiers. Bit by bit, torn apart, never win, but the battle wages on for toy soldiers. Yeah. Along the way, you discover the source of the robot corruption is tied to a human plague that wipes out surviving humans and transforms them into monsters for a 1-2 death punch. Lies of P plays this story out vastly in a single hub played out in a hotel, all your friends hiding, because apparently they are too chicken to ever leave. This hub is used for all leveling, weapon upgrades, shopping, target dummies, etc, etc, etc. Having to go back to the hub over and over to use your ergo, which is this game's souls, is kind of a meh feeling, but the load times are pretty quick and it does at least serve to bring you back in for the story. There are side stories from the different characters, but really that's it. That's your mission, and a synopsis that can be given without going into some fast spoiler territory. I will say one thing. There is a bonus cinematic after all the credits that directly points to a sequel, and that locks in a story direction that is super intriguing, and I did not predict it. It is an amazing movie-like twist. If you missed this, thank me later and go take a look. Following the story theme, the world looks perfect for it. Huge buildings that are torn to pieces and bodies strewn around everywhere. Swamps of fetid pools and the city's dumping grounds, and an art-looking museum with expensive-looking statues. All fit flawlessly with the look I feel the developers were after. Best of all these zones are seamlessly tied with absolutely no load times unless you teleport using a Stargazer, which is a Dark Souls bonfire. You can just run through the world. The music score of the overall world was very muted for most of the game, but there were nice touches like some carnival music. The music gets a special note for me for the endgame areas. It really popped off and got me hyped to keep pushing through those endgame bosses. Now what this means is that you can hear the actually awesome combat sounds. The attacks make a very satisfying hit noises, and parrying makes a stupidly good sound. And I'm all here for it. The game is gorgeous and detailed. It is very easy to get drawn into this world as it feels like you're actually crawling through a city and the surrounding areas. I was a little disappointed that more of the environment could not be interacted with in any way, such as a bunch of random boxes or barrels being unable to be broken through. There was also a small plague of random ground items meant to look pretty, but in actuality have their own small hitboxes that could get your character stuck on them. I remember dying to Laxstria near the end of one of my times by getting stuck on a little tiny strobe light that was on the ground. It was just meant to be lighting and I couldn't move through it. The enemies are fun, but they do start sharing the same art, so you'll see the same dogs from chapter 1 in different coloring and attacks, and the same humanoid looking robots. As usual, this kind of thing doesn't really bother me, and in this case even less so since most of the enemies are punching bags you can cut down. Speaking of cutting down enemies, let's talk about the act of doing so. Before mentioning the combat interactions, I want to take a look at what options you can look at playing with. You get melee weapons. A lot of different melee weapons, especially if you get into the crafting of breaking these down and rebuilding them. The melee weapons are broken into 3 separate categories of motivity, technique, and advance. each with a ranking from A to nothing. These are the same stats you can use to level up. So if you look here, you got Motivity, Technique, and Advance. The obvious is that the stats only increase the damage of the weapons in proportion of their category rank. If you have an A Motivity and no other rank weapon, you regain damage only from leveling up Motivity, but a lot of it. The reason this is important is that it effectively limits your weapon choices to what you have chosen to level, and once you pick a stat, it is most effective to stay on and never really change. I also picked up through experimenting with a second game file that there's a pretty clear weapon imbalance that is kind of inherent to the systems of the game. Although it's not directly talked about in-game, there is a poise meter for knocking down and stunning enemies. The problem is that I feel like fast rapier style weapons and big two-hand slow weapons are not really in line. Two-hand does do more poise damage, but I feel fast weapons can do it 3 times faster while doing more damage in the same time frame and being ultimately safer. It's hard to demonstrate due to the nature of character levels, weapon levels, etc., but I could certainly feel it. It's fine, it's okay, but there's no shot this isn't a pain point. I beat the game with a big two-handed wrench, so it's clearly playable, but staggering enemies with a two-hander was way more difficult than with the one-hander. If a sequel comes out, maybe they could revisit some of these systems and just level them out a bit more. There are 2 other tricks the game gives you to fight with: Legion weapons and throwable items. Legion weapons, I feel, are supposed to be Lies of P's spellcasting playstyle, but it never really felt good to me. In practice, you can level up its damage like you do your weapons, but their effects always felt so limited to both their proximity and hit range. Since enemies are so mobile, and the number of uses you can do with them are so limited, that never really felt viable. Pretty early on, I relegated them to a side tool in limited situations, but otherwise just forgot about them. Perhaps it's just my playstyle, and others might have better results with them, but I just used the blocking Legion arm for its utility, especially since you only get to choose one of them at any given time to be activated until much later in the game. Let me know down below if you found any Legion arm builds that really shine, because I would be interested to try them myself in another game. Throwable items, on the other hand, are fun and viable. In fact, they had the potential to be downright devastating, but much more limited. Throwing stuff was never my playstyle, but I won't knock it. Lies of P did do throwable items justice. This initially sounds like your options are limited on how you're going to fight, and in a way it is, since it pretty much leads to get in melee and hit things with a limited weapon pool. But Lies of P does have a fairly enjoyable weapon crafting system that can help mix things up a little more. Having talked about items, I'm going to take a left turn from combat and talk about the game's world design. I'm going to be real here. They do give you side tunnels and a little exploration to be had, but this game is a completely set path. There is no pick your own target play here. I'm alright with both forms of design, but I understand this is somewhat a personal choice here. What is cool is there is a metric crap ton of items to be found. There are shinies everywhere and enemies drop loot like candy. Now, is much of that stuff particularly useful? It's debatable, but it's always fun to pick stuff up in these games, and if you want to do a fight with throwing weapons, there are usually plenty to be found. It is nearly impossible to have an issue with save points and runbacks. Most of the chapters have 2 to 4 stargazers and tons of shortcuts that open up and loop back to them, making the layout pretty relaxed and non-punishing. This is further assisted by most of the basic enemies around the caliber whack them with a stick and they die. What I was a little disappointed by was in regard to the enemy AI. The levels have what I call elite enemies that are tougher to take down for more rewards. These elites have the attention span and awareness of goldfish. Almost without exception, they have this small leashing range where if you pull them back while hitting them, they would just turn around and walk away, letting you hit it again. Kinda took the wind out of the excitement of killing them for a bit, since it could happen even if you tried fighting them fair. These mobs are also usually larger in size and suffer from the same weird stuck-on objects that I mentioned happen to your character. There were more than a couple of big baddies that get stuck trying to get through a fence that I couldn't fit through, and I just whopped it over and over again. The smaller level designs also make this game very easy to farm levels to power through the game if you need the help. There are a lot of monsters clustered around the corners of these save points, which are plentiful to get to and are easy to kill. That's a lot of thoughts about what you're going to get into moving around, but what about the famous boss soul games are known for? This is where you're going to lose some sanity. Lies of P wants each boss to live in your dreams. I also felt like the developers have room to polish up this area since it never really felt fair. I mentioned it in the audio part, but there's a parry in this game. The parry is relatively vital to learn to some extent since there is very little odds of simply dodging your way through the entire game to victory. The parry is monstrously timed to the second, so be prepared to die for a bit, learning the timings of attacks that have to be parried. Lots of times, it's easier to sprint out if you can, since animation locks make parrying to this specific of a degree very dicey. To add more punishment to this, there was an overabundance of held delayed attacks, which then doubled down what felt like an uneven attack pattern. Even in a combo, attack a boss will just hold an attack mid-combo and then spontaneously throw it out. The hitboxes of these attacks also felt bad. I struggled with thinking about this because later in the game you kind of get used to it and mentally adjust, but the game shouldn't be built around you doing this. What I mean by this is a boss could swing his hammer and would even have a line demonstrating his hit strike. You could be 5 steps outside of it and get flattened. You play back a clip of it and see nothing touch you. You die and your body is outside the shattered ground effect, a stomped hit, etc., etc. The inverse was true as well. You are locked onto the boss, you swing at the boss wiggles his head and lifts which is your target point, and you swing and it hits his foot. Your swing does 0 damage and the boss then proceeds to hit you. It felt a little cheap. I felt like there was a pattern where the bigger the enemy is in general, which unfortunately are most of the bosses, the more pronounced these hitbox issues became. I don't know anything about game design, but maybe it just got set where the big enemy made attack patterns large and it never got scaled in quite the right way, or maybe it's just all in my head. Leave a comment down below if you have any disagreement with that. I will say this though, the more humanoid-sized bosses like the Black Rabbit Brotherhood fights and the optional fights like the Red Fox all felt like a hit was a hit. Also, who in the heck figured the gravity of these beefy things jumping into the air and doing a 180-degree spin like a homing missile when you dodge last second? Like, come on, at least try to disguise the fact that you want you're doing corpse runs. The game also utilizes an evolution system called P-Organs. This is Lies of P's have more flasks, flasks heal more, etc. I generally found the system be fairly fun to customize with, but thought that the quartz that activated it could be found more in the mid-game and a couple of the effects should have just been in the game. Why would you lock dodging when on the ground, dodge inside of a dodge, or even perfect block breaking an enemy stance behind this? So where do I land with this game? Some of the final numbers from my play was a $60 game, and I have clocked about 44 hours to beat it, and I'm at 54 hours total because the new game pluses are still very enjoyable thanks to the multiple decisions that actually outcome the game. Even if you're a Souls pro that beat this game way faster than myself, the replay experience makes this game with great value. I know the Game Awards have been announced, and in my opinion, the categories Lies of P is competing in are very solid, and definitely should win one of them, and deservingly so. This game is not up for the Game of the Year, and I think for solid reasons. My personal score is a B+, which I think is an aggregate from the start of the game being a C+ to a B-, and the end of the game being an A when you get those quality of life abilities. The truth is this, Lies of P is an amazing first shot at this genre for these developers, but there are some soft spots that need to be stiffened up if they want to go for the sequel. And please, if you guys watch this, give us a sequel, I need it. Mostly just add a little more punch to their overall level with smarter AI mobs and button up the hitboxes of your bosses so the difficulty gap isn't so grossly just one-sided of the game. So tell me your thoughts. I expect some division here, but frankly I always do. Let me know in the comments down below, and please hit the ever appreciated like, subscribe buttons if my thoughts intrigued you. I have a couple of the other videos on my channel, and I stream live on Twitch as Von Dingerbell quite regularly. We have a link on my channel on my page. My current game I'm tackling is Ender Lilies Quietest of the Nights. I think I pronounced that correctly. I hope to see you all there to shower me with thoughts on how bad I am at reading game maps. If you want to join me in the selection of what I play, I have a community Discord at Von Dingerbell Gaming. Until next time though everyone, dinner's done.